Good good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's one-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd. We have an amazing panel with us today. Professors Brian Levin from Cal State San Bernardino, Shea Street from University of Michigan. We also have Professor Aklam Mutaseb from CSUSB, and another special guest is Dean Cesar Caballero from the Pfau Library. He's the university librarian. I'm going to turn it over real quickly to Cesar, who's going to give some brief introductory remarks.
Thank you, Robie. First of all, let me thank all of the viewers that are with us today. Thank you for joining us. And then briefly, before I make my brief remarks, please join us in a moment of silence in memory of George Floyd. Thank you. I would also like to thank the series organizers that have done an excellent job of organizing this whole series since a year ago. I would like to thank Dr. Mary Texeira, Sociology Department, Mr. Robie Madrigal from the Pfau Library, my colleague, Dr. Jeremiah Murray, History Department, Dr. Stan Futch from who's the president of the WAG, West Side Action Group, our friend. And of course, I should also mention that we have two students serving on this organizing committee from CSUSB, two of our students, Mario Brooks and Evelyn Jimenez. Thank you very much for all that you do. And thank you for allowing me to make a few comments, and I'll be very brief. It's been a year since the murder of George Floyd, and boy, has it been a year. It's been full of protests and rallies and conversations and discussions. But what's important is that many of us hope that this national tragedy will result in a very positive social changes, such as police reform, which is badly needed. And I hear people talking and the conversations, and some people are actually suggesting that we shouldn't hire retired soldiers to become policemen since they were trained for war. And if we do hire soldiers, that we train them to serve and protect, not to maim and injure and offend. And that maybe we should supply police departments with weapons and materials designed for battle, because maybe that entices policemen to think that they're in the middle of a battle. Weapons of war are being used. Very high caliber weapons are being used on civilians, grenades. We can go on and on. And maybe it should be against the law for policemen to turn off their body cameras, because as we know, body camera video can be used in courts. And finally, what I hear is that the policemen should be trained to serve and protect. That's all I have to say today, because we have great presenters, so I don't want to make my comments more than they should be. Thank you very much. I believe the next speaker is Alam, Dr. Alam.
Thank you, Dean.
Yes, can you hear me? All right. Well, thank you so much for allowing me this space and to share, a statement on behalf of the CSUSB Center for the Study of Muslim and Arab Worlds. It's a statement for Palestine. The Center for the Study of Muslim and Arab Worlds at California State University, San Bernardino expresses its sadness about and condemnation of the Israeli racist and colonial violence against and oppression of the Palestinian communities under its control. Palestinians in Israel live as second-class citizens under more than 65 laws that discriminate against them. In the West Bank, Israelis inflict the violence of a settler colonial state through brutal military occupation, home demolitions, policing, and surveillance, as well as through the construction of a wall that runs deep through Palestinian territory, cutting Palestinians off from their land and their families. In East Jerusalem neighborhoods like Sheikh Jarrah, the Israeli government forces Palestinians out of their homes under the guise of a real estate dispute and has targeted mosques where Palestinians gather to pray. In particular, we are shocked at the level of violent retaliation against Palestinians in Gaza, the most densely populated area in the world, which has resulted in the brutal killing of over 240 people, mainly civilians, including 66 children, 39 women, and 17 seniors, according to the latest report from Haaretz newspaper. All of these lives were taken in a mere 11 days as Gazans continued to pull the dead from under the rubble. Additionally, close to 2,000 people were injured as a result of the ongoing Israeli air, land, and sea shelling. In a horrifying statistic, it is estimated that 20 families in Gaza have been completely eradicated by Israeli aggression. In addition to the loss of human life, the New York Times reported that the Israeli bombardment had damaged 17 hospitals and clinics in Gaza, including its only coronavirus test laboratory. Those bombardments sent fetid wastewater into the streets and broke water pipes, serving at least 800,000 people. Sewage systems inside Gaza have been destroyed, and a desalination plant that helped provide fresh water to 250,000 people in the territory is currently offline. Israeli attacks, including airstrikes and tank shells, resulted in the damage of at least 51 educational facilities, including 2 kindergartens, 46 schools, 1 university, 1 vocational training center, and 1 Ministry of Education facility, among other vital infrastructure, according to the United Nations. Sorry, I apologize, I'm a little bit emotional. In addition, Israeli military strikes internally displaced at least 66,000 Palestinians who have since had to seek refuge in schools run by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, causing further disruptions to the Palestinian people's education and their lives. Unfortunately, the current ceasefire will not end the brutal siege on Gaza that has been going on since 2007, effectively transforming Gaza into an open-air prison or concentration camp controlled by Israel from land, sea, and air. Since 2007, the people of Gaza have been put on a forced diet by the Israeli government's practice of calorie count based on their control of the population registry. More than half of the population of Gaza, some 56%, live below the poverty line. 70% of the population is receiving aid according to estimates by the United Nations, and food rations constitute most of that aid. Unemployment in Gaza is around 45%, while 48% of the population is under the age of 18, and 70% of the young people in Gaza are unemployed with no hope for the future. We share these statistics and data to illustrate the realities of institutional settler colonial violence that has resulted in these conditions under which Palestinians are forced to live. As we commemorate the annual anniversary of the brutal murder of George Floyd, we condemn all state-sponsored violence and terrorism. It is also important to note that this latest episode of Israeli state violence should not be discussed in isolation of its history of colonial practices against Palestinians, especially since the majority of Gazans are refugees who were ethnically expelled from their homes and lands by the Zionist militias that created the State of Israel. The recent 213-page report from Human Rights Watch detailing crimes of apartheid and persecution by Israeli authorities highlights myriad ways in which Israel continues to push Palestinians out of their homes. Before HRW or Human Rights Watch, the Israeli human rights organization Beit Salem issued a similar report about Israel's war crimes. As a center committed to the study of Muslim and Arab worlds, we cannot be silent. We issue this statement in support and solidarity with the colonized people of Palestine and the resistance to the military and apartheid state of Israel. We understand that this is not just a Palestine-Israel conflict, but it is a one-sided humanitarian crisis fueled by US military aid to Israel, as well as the circulation of biased mainstream propaganda that dehumanizes Palestinians on a daily basis. We also firmly believe this affects all of us and that our own liberation is tied to the liberation of all oppressed people around the world, including our Black, Latinx, Indigenous, undocumented, and all other marginalized brothers and sisters. We salute the bravery and resilience of the Palestinian resistance in the face of colonial violence and call on our government to stop its complacency in yet another capitalist, imperialist atrocity. Signed by the executive board of the center. And I just want to add one thing before I give the podium back to you, is that yesterday after I posted the statement on behalf of the center to our academic listserv, I received, the whole campus actually basically received a very racist email from one of the faculty members. And I was shocked at the level of racism in that email and the fact that this is still allowed against Arabs basically in academia. One sentence in the email was actually a quote from war criminal Golda Meir stating that we will have peace only if Arabs love their children more than they hate us. And now imagine if I sent that email and I said, we will have peace only if Jews love their children more than they hate us. I probably would be on the first pages of all newspapers in the United States. It's unbelievable that we still see this kind of racist discourse, the same racist, Islamophobic, Orientalist discourse that enables, such practices against Arabs and Muslims, but also it's the same logic, the same racist discourse that enabled the colonization of the Americas through the dehumanization of indigenous people, or the enslavement of Blacks through the dehumanization of Black people, or actually the Holocaust of the Jews as a result of the dehumanization of Jewish people. And I just call on the campus administration to actually act in denouncing and condemning such racist discourse on our campus. And lastly, the logic of coloniality is not complicated. It's actually very simple. And I'm going to share this video with you to explain that point. It's very, very short. Sorry, I actually didn't hit the, just one second. Can you see it? Can someone tell me if you can see it? Sorry, I can't see noise.
No, we can't see it.
How about now?
No, we don't see any video.
We see your screen, but not the video.
Okay, 1 second. If that doesn't work, I will move on. Sorry about that. Yes, I hit the wrong desktop because I'm so nervous. All right, how about now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
You are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is gonna steal it.
No one is allowed to steal it, يا عمي. Jacob, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? Why are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
But
It's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
you are stealing my house.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop here. And just as I said, the colonial logic is very easy. If I don't steal it, someone else is gonna steal it. Thank you for listening and for allowing me this space.
Stan, did you want to do the good news segment?
Yes, and thank you so much for that presentation. A lot of people are interested and a lot of people are concerned about what is going on over there, and I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. Thank you so much. The good news, LA City Council agreed to move $56.6 million from the LAPD's budget to minority community in Los Angeles, and that's huge. We talk about monies being taken out of the police force and put in positive places, and this was a huge move on the LA City Council. So I just want to say that's good news for what we are talking about. Thank you.
Professor Streeter, I think you're up now.
Wonderful. I want to thank you all for having me. This is an important, well, I guess yesterday, but continuing on today was a very important day for all of us. So, on anniversaries, we take stock. We reflect on the lessons learned and we renew our commitments. So last year, the world watched for 9 minutes as the breath slowly left George Floyd. Last year was the largest social movement in US history. So it's estimated that more than 20 million people protested against police violence and racial injustice in at least 9,000 demonstrations across all 50 states. Additionally, there were Black Lives Matter protests or acts of solidarity in nearly 100 other countries around the world. This movement, I think, has really changed the trajectory of our country and likely influenced the outcome of the past election. But what has it done for policing? It's really hard for me to come up with things to say today because I have so many conflicting emotions. I have hope because 20 million people were willing not just post on social media, but physically go out and condemn racist, excessive policing. Many of them have absorbed and embraced new ideas and ways of thinking about policing and race. At the same time, I think about the fact that after this massive uprising, like every year, the police have killed at least 1,000 more people in this country. On the other hand, Derek Chauvin was convicted of murder, which is something a year ago I would have said was highly unlikely. But that conviction changed the life of one man, one. It didn't bring George back. It didn't repair his family or community. It didn't change policy, and it didn't stop other police killings. However, the fact I choose to focus on is that we're all here in this Zoom room, still talking about George, still talking about the many, many others who have been killed, still trying to figure out some way to keep this from happening in the future. We're not going to create a new paradigm for public security, health, and flourishing today, but just by continuing to talk about it, by continuing to imagine what that future could be, we're making that future ever so much more possible. Thank you.
Professor Levin, did you want to say a few words?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. And before I go into the subject at hand, as the director of a center on campus, I have a piece of paper and an announcement. And that is, by the limited authority vested in me by the state of California, I nevertheless, this is actually the real part, am hereby bestowing on behalf of the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism, and gladly so, the Superlative Scholar Award for our very own Dr. Mary Texeira. She has been such a wonderful treasure for our university. And she, along with a lot of great people, happy birthday, Dean Caesar, have done such great things. And, I went to the dean several weeks ago and I said, I please call me. And I said, I have good news. And he didn't call me for a while, which meant he had a lot of fires to put out. And I said, I want to recognize Dr. Texeira when we come back to campus. And he's like, that's a great idea. And shortly thereafter, I got this opportunity today. So when we get to print it up and get her the appropriate book, we're going to do it on campus. But she has been such an indefatigable warrior for knowledge and justice on our campus that I wanted to make sure that I got that in before I misplaced my glasses. So anyway, thank you so much for giving me that opportunity, and it's on tape. So we
Wait
have.
a minute, do I get to make a speech, or can I make a speech?
I think you should, but it's not my house here.
No, I just want to thank you, Brian. I have, as some of you know, that next year is my last year. And so I'm going out with a bang. I'm going out with a bang. So hold your horses.
We
But I
love you so
appreciate it.
much, Mary.
Well,
And
thank you, Brian.
I can't tell you how many times I had students come into my class singing your praises. And I would eventually just say, who's had Dr. Texeira? And it was a wonderful bridge from some of the things that I did not have the time or ability or skill to cover. And thank you so much for being this partner in anti-hate. But from the bottom of our heart, thank you so much for being that indefatigable warrior for knowledge and justice. And everyone on campus who knows you knows exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Now we got to print the darn thing up. Well, anyway, with that auspicious beginning, thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who comes here, because I'll tell you something, what we have is powerful. After the San Bernardino terror attack in 2015, 5 days later, candidate Trump proposed his first Muslim ban proposal. And we saw hate crimes against Muslims jump another 23% more than what they jumped from the time of the actual event. Similarly, after Charlottesville, that was the third worst month for hate crime of the last decade. It was tied. But the worst days that month were in the 6 days of and after the Very Fine People statement. And what we found, for instance, here in San Bernardino, as we were having hate crimes rise across the country, as the National Review called me a tendacious researcher who somehow made it up and, like, I don't know, was paid off by CARE or something. But that's what they wrote in the National Review. It turned out that month, when we told the New York Times and we told government officials, we're seeing a spike in the importance of community. What we're seeing here with this series, for instance, guess what? We didn't have one anti-Muslim hate crime in the city of San Bernardino during that time, when we had the third worst month, the worst month since 2001 nationally. Doesn't mean there weren't any, but at least, you know, from the data that we have. Now we've been seeing over the last year a spike in hate crimes against Asian people. Our research has showed 146% increase during that year. But you know what has snuck in there? Anti-Black racial hate crimes were up. Certainly in Southern California, we're seeing that. So what are some of the things broadly that we're seeing, and what are the things we're seeing on a micro level? Well, the first thing is, the first thing I got to do as a lawyer was represent a bunch of California civil rights groups and jurisdictions, and Reverend C.T. Vivian, who passed away in the same day as John Lewis last year. His Center for Democratic Renewal, formerly known as the National Anti-Klan Network. Reverend Vivian was head of Southern Christian Leadership Conference after Dr. King, and Dr. King called him the best preacher he's ever seen. And he always spoke of a beloved community. And sometime after I represented his group with regard to hate crime laws and the constitutionality of them, I sat in his living room, stacked floor to ceiling with books, and my knees were shaking, and he put his hand on my knee, said, "Doc, I put on my pants one leg at a time, just like you do." And I said, "Yeah, but you're a civil rights icon who put his life on the line, and I kind of just write fancy things and crunch numbers, at least plus or minuses and percentages." And he said, "No, here's the thing. At that time, the line was drawn. If we put our lives on the line, we knew that there would be something to result from it, but we might not live." That was a little short version, not as nearly as eloquent. But the point that he was trying to make was, we're going to see things in waves, and they're going to be very complex. So just let's look at some of the things we've seen here. For instance, the bastardization over the past year and the retrenchment of support for Black Lives Matter, as well as their philosophical underpinnings, and the truth about the generally peaceful protests, and also the role of Reverend Vivian's and Congressperson Lewis's beloved community. So what are some things that we've seen? Look, about 95% of these were totally peaceful. Also, if you look at Ben Crump, if you look at the families, look at the Get Your Knee Off Our Neck rally. Every single family spoke of nonviolence. Additionally, this has been reverberated into a variety of pieces of legislation, including the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which we'll talk about a little later, as well as efforts at the state level to ban chokeholds. New York, just today, working with respect to not rehiring fired police officers. Our center, I am thrilled to tell you, is involved with USC's effort with respect to the Lewis Registry about disgraced and fired police officers. There's a lot of things that can be done, but the big debate now is, can we get a bill? And if so, will it have qualified immunity? We're part of a consortium working on this. We're also interfacing with our friends in DC. I was just there a couple of weeks ago. We are hoping that we have passage of an additional House, but I think we're at a tenuous place in those negotiations. So I guess if I could close this short intro is, don't expect the fact that we all saw this and the fact that people were out in the streets will cause a self-executing effort with respect to getting legislation passed and then getting it implemented once it is. It has to be not only done at the federal level, but the state as well. And I'll talk about some of those things later.
Thank you. Thank all of you for stepping up and coming to this show. I just have a few comments myself, and one of them is, since the Floyd and the Black Lives Matter and all the protests that have been going on, there's been 1 million committees set up. And my biggest thing is there's so much talk and so little action. Not a lot of action have we seen. I mean, actual somebody saying, I'm gonna do this and actually doing it. I'm gonna take money from the police department, actually doing it. That's why the LA thing was such a big, it was amazing when I saw that on the news last night. But there's so much talk. Can either of you discuss about what change, you also mentioned that, Dr. Levin, but the changes that are going to come about from all this that's going on. Can we talk about some changes that we would like to see and some changes that we know will happen? Either.
So changes that I'd like to see. I just want to kind of put some context for where I'm coming from all of this. So I apologize, there's construction noise in the background here. But in my work, every day I am collecting data on police killings. So every single day I am reading detailed reports about how people are being killed by police. And because I'm deep in that work and I have read thousands of these cases now and engaged with thousands of deaths, I'm just going to put it out there that I'm not the biggest reformist in the sense of, you know, like hope. The issue is with the police are quite substantive. And I think that, you know, there are some things that are great, that there are changes being made. And I think the biggest thing is that, you know, people are demanding change. But I think some of them are kind of the equivalent of, you know, you have a sewage leak and we're like, okay, well, we're finally gonna like start to close the flow of new sewage coming in. So we still have a lot of toxic waste to clean up, is basically what I'm trying to say. But I really look forward to hearing what the change, you know, Dr. Levin is really engaged with this legislative change. And I really look forward to hearing some of what he has to say about what is actually in the pipeline, because that's the aspect of things that I'm probably less familiar with. But I will say that, you know, I tend to think of the police, I think we need to acknowledge, to think about the role that we want police to have in our public health and safety paradigm. Like thinking about what do we need to make up, to live our best lives, to live healthy, long lives, and how do the police, first of all, questioning, do the police play a role in that? And if so, what role should they play? Because right now they're playing everything. They're playing all, they're trying to do everything. They also don't want to do everything. And so I think really going to first principles of thinking about what do we need to feel like we can live our best lives in security and health and flourishing, and how do the police fit into that? And starting from there.
Well, I think the first thing we should do is ban teaching on systemic racism. That's the first thing we should do to eliminate this problem. Look, this is the political milieu we're in right now. Only 18% of Americans favor defund the police. About 60% are opposed to it, and it's higher among whites. Also, how political power is distributed in this country affects things. So I want to be careful here. I'm sure there are like a lot of great things that we should do, certainly even in the abstract. But here's what's kind of on the table now in the world that I'm in, because I'm constantly asked to look at different pieces of legislation. And when I ask for other things, the calls aren't given as much. But here in California, for instance, there is a bill with regard to, for instance, hate crime victims. But where do you keep that repository if you don't want law enforcement? Attorney General's office is the one that usually collects data. We're looking to create a state of hate commission. We got marching orders, basically. No police, have it civilians, subject matter experts. So I think some of the things you have to do is create places where reformers will meet and will have clout, and also have some kind of continuity. So that's why I think a state of hate commission would be good here in California. The CLEAR Act, something that would ban police from hiring folks that have talked about extremist violence and similar types of discourse online. You have some First Amendment issues with that. But the Floyd Act, I think is really needed, and here's why. In the New York Review of Books, they said something about the '64 Civil Rights Act, and they talked about the various components of that act, which were important, created the Community Relations Service. We have a variety of new methods with regard to protecting civil rights out of the '64 Act. Similarly, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, by creating a registry of kind of disgraced officers, that's important so they don't get rehired. Our friends at USC are doing it, and we're joining with them. So there are actual things we can do, but as a political choice, we haven't, as a community, made up our minds in a way that is going to be continuing and get the change that a lot of us think should have right away. Why can't we get a national ban with respect to federal law on chokeholds? Federal use of body camera. These are things that, like, there really should be no debate about. But what I'm saying to you is, and let me close with this. This is the environment we're in. I'm older than most folks. I was talking to an assembly person yesterday. He said, "Oh, my hair's grayer than yours." I said, "I'm older." That was the case. Let me tell you something. We're seeing what Reverend Vivian said. We're seeing a multi-front attack on Black suffrage, on the protection of our Black residents, friends, family, and neighbors. And we're also seeing an attempt to ban discourse around race. I mean, look at the denial of tenure. Look at, with respect to laws being passed about the 1619 Project. We're seeing multiple things going on. Real briefly, listen to this, what Reverend Vivian was talking about, this multiple front. Hate crime prosecutions declined by 38.5% under last administration, number one. Number two, zero. A mentor of mine was a Black federal appellate judge, Leon Higginbotham. And we had 0 Black federal appellate judges appointed last administration. Under the two-term Obama administration, we had over 24 DOJ interventions with police. We had 1 over the last 4 years. So what I'm saying, and the Civil Community Relations Service, which was formed by the '64 Civil Rights Act about racial reconciliation, was gutted. So we have the need now for state and locals to do something. And in closing, where's the threat coming from? We're seeing a much more dispersed threat, but it's regional. And we're seeing the plurality at our center beg for this. We had a corruption of the intelligence cycle in the last term, where white supremacy and far-right violence against people of color and religious minorities like Muslims was downplayed, and the intelligence cycle was corrupted. We, through our data, showed white supremacists and far-right violence increasing. We saw what happened with the insurrection on January 6th. And what I'm saying to you is, we have to develop not only laws, and not necessarily focus on criminalizing things. We're against a new terror act, for instance, but we are for bureaucratic personnel, resource changes, and messages coming from the top, saying the new type of globalized white supremacy, which is bubbling up regionally, and we've seen it here in California, is something that we have to address. And part of that is cleaning up our police departments to make sure that we don't have extremists or bigots within them. One of the things that I'm working on now is getting a series of homicides where there's a possible police connection in the Midwest to DOJ. So there's a lot of work nationwide. And I think what George Floyd did was put a symbolic, lovable face. He was lovable. He was lovable. He was your friend. He was your neighbor. He was your cousin. And in the same way, Matthew Shepard changed how non-gays looked at the issue of homophobia. George Floyd, in the lynching that had occurred to him, what came out of that was a multiracial movement. The issue is the obstacles that are used to stop reasonable and completely consensus change that is being done right now. Kristen Clark, one of the stars in the constellation of civil rights activists, who I've seen her career over decades. I'm old, people. 48 folks voted against her to head up the Civil Rights Division. That's where we're at.
Thank you. Thank you both for the answer. Talk about demonstrations. So when Black Lives Matter were demonstrating, peacefully demonstrating, they'd start around noon and they'd go on till wee hours of the night, but I don't think that's true. I think Black Lives Matter was doing their demonstration from the noon time to around 6 and 7 o'clock at night. But on the news, you saw from 7 to 10 o'clock to midnight, and all the burning and all the break-ins to businesses and so on. Gets me back to just what recently happened in Huntington Beach. Huntington Beach had a TikTok, or I'm not sure how they got out there, but they had a big demonstration, and it got rowdy and it got ugly. Not one ground camera was on the ground, so they didn't show the young white males breaking into places, stealing things. There were no Zoom, close-up videos of anything that happened on the ground that day. And yet every time BLM did something, the cameras were in their faces. And so talk about how not just the media, but how the country looks at when we deal with, and no one was called a thug on the Huntington Beach thing, when they were going around stopping cars and banging on cars and shaking cars and doing all the things they were doing. Not one person was called a thug. The terminology that they used was completely the opposite as they used during Black Lives Matter. Let's talk about a little bit about how the world is still, and we've had all these committees and we've had all this research, and how the things are still the same. Dr. Streeter.
Yeah, no, I saw I think it was a panel of Trump voters, and they were talking about their perceptions of Black Lives Matter, and every single person was like, oh yeah, this is a violent organization. And yet we saw that, between 95 and 96% of these demonstrations had zero violence. And I just want to clarify that by violence, we're really talking about property damage. And so when we're talking about violence, violence is what the police did to George Floyd. Violence is physically injuring somebody. Violence is taking the life from somebody. And I think that we also have to clarify that this is also how I think many in the movement think of these things, is that there's property destruction, and then there's violence. And most of the violence we actually saw in these protests was from the police directed at protesters. And I think that is something that I have been, it really shocked me, and it still shocks me how little we continue to speak about that, about how much brutalization there were of demonstrators this last summer, and how, you know, it's regular practice in many cities, in many major cities, in many democratically controlled cities. I just want to bring that up because I think we kind of think of this as so much of a partisan sort of issue, but these are democratically controlled cities where most of the violence against protesters was happening, where you have officers taking off their badges deliberately and just beating people, pepper spraying people who were children, rounding up people in mass arrest during the daytime. And I have been a participant in these demonstrations as an observer of documenting, okay, what happens at various points in these demonstrations. And I will say, I almost without fail, it is the police severe aggression that sets off any sort of, if there is any property damage that comes later, I can always find some video during the day when the police were just truly brutalizing perfectly peaceful demonstrators. And so I think we have to think a little bit about, you know, there's the self-defense that protesters maybe, we have to question, is there any allowable self-defense against the police? And also, I think the issue is that there doesn't seem to be any self-defense against the media in these situations, because once you have that on camera, that is all. And, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. And there was a lot of protester blood, and yet we didn't see that. We only actually saw fires. So if it's on fire, it leads. It seemed to be the lesson of last summer, because all of that blood was not being televised. And I don't really know what the answer is, because you can't, you know, you can tell people that 96% or more of these demonstrations were peaceful, and of those that led to actual physical violence or vanished, you know, you could count them on your hands. But if those images, people will not forget the images of people, you know, going into buildings and taking merchandise, or trash cans, or, you know, dumpsters on fire. And unfortunately, that has become the image of the movement in the minds of many, many, many Americans. The only thing I can think to say is that, well, there will be another video of another Black person being brutalized by police. And I can guarantee you this summer, there will be one. And so they don't want to see that, but that is the image of the movement, really. It's not the property damage. That the image of the movement is the images of those people whose lives are being taken. And it is too bad that that's how the demonstrations are presented. But again, over 20 million people who participated did not riot, did not conduct any sort of property damage or violence, and were perfectly peaceful. But again, I think we need to consider the standards that we hold just average people to the standards that we hold highly trained and accountable civil servants. We don't require nonviolence from them, and yet we do from everyday people. And so just want to bring that up as well, of who are we demanding nonviolence from?
Could I just interject one quick thing though? The leadership of Black Lives Matter and the way that they coalesced. Remember, BLM started after the murder of Trayvon Martin. And as anyone who's been in civil rights, when stuff starts at a grassroots level and time frame, it's different from when it coalesces. And what we've seen has a smart and purposeful by the leadership and respected allies, whether it's Ben Crump, whether it's Al Sharpton, whether it's the families, all the way through, specifically saying nonviolence. And I think there's something twofold for that. One, Reverend Vivian, who was a bit of a mentor of mine, that was what was, mixed into my cereal. But also what we saw, and we saw various politicians refer to this, is the recastment, just as they did in the 60s, of these inheritors of the beloved community of the civil rights movement, of which BLM is. That's why it was so important as a symbol of iconography when John Lewis stood at BLM terrace in DC, because what BLM now is, at least in the mindset of the majority of Americans, but it's a slipping one. Don't take it for granted that everyone will support us. But one that is taken by most, but not all, as a benevolent movement, but it's been manipulated. And how has it been manipulated? What we've been monitoring on social media, they're communists, they're Antifa, stuff related to Q that you can't even figure out. But anytime when there's something with regard to standing up to either the disenfranchisement of Blacks or law enforcement overreach, we have seen a violent pushback by the hard right, and that's been true historically.
Can I just add one thing?
Go ahead.
Because I think that there's I just wanted to add something. You're talking about the leadership. There is I see a lot that I think there's this misconception that Black Lives Matter is an organization, which there is there is an organization, there's a website. Black Lives Matter is an organizing slogan. The leaders of this movement are young, Black, many queer, mostly women. They are local organizers who do have connections with other activists and organizers in other cities, but they are very highly locally embedded. Most of their organizations don't even include the term Black Lives Matter in their description. And so I just want to be clear that this is a decentralized movement. This is led by the youth mostly, of millennials and down, I would say the vast majority. And I think this is what makes it problematic to try to hold Black Lives Matter accountable for something, but also to say that Black Lives Matter should be developing some kind of overarching narrative or producing a leader, because I think that these organizers are embedded in their cities and they know what their communities need and they're working towards that, because every city is different and policing is completely locally controlled. And so that is just the structure that we have. And so I just wanted to clarify that, because every time I get a chance to speak on this, I like to clarify that for folks, because sometimes people are surprised that actually it's not an organization, it's an organizing slogan, and it's the term, and those who are within it tend to refer to it as the movement for Black Lives, and movement for Black Lives in all of its forms, including not being killed by law enforcement. So I just wanted to add that.
And Dr. Levin, thank you so much for mentioning Trayvon Martin, because the truth of the matter is, I think in order to get people's attention, something unusual has to happen. And this was a young kid going to the store to get some Skittles that was killed by a guy who was truly tracking every movement he made. And so that was, to me, that's the start. And then George Floyd, the reason why that was such a newsmaker was we all got to watch it on TV. We all got to see the video over and over and over again. And Dr. Streeter, you're right. We're gonna see another death, and it's gonna be a death of someone that touches everybody's heart. And that's what's going on, is we are seeing these things happen to people who we relate to. And the LGBTQ community, they have gone through trials, and that's why they have rallied with Black Lives Matter. And young people just can't understand what's going on. So that's why they're rallying. I wish she was here. We have a young lady, Zoralynn. She's tremendous, lots of energy, and I wish she was here today to speak on it. But the truth of the matter is, those things that we rally behind are, to me, it happens every day. Someone gets killed by a policeman. To me, a Black person, and the policeman gets away with it. But when you see something that just is unbelievable, people rally. People do rally. So thank you. Mary has it. Mary.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to our guests. You guys have been wonderful, and your comments have been right on in terms of what is going on. And I just want to give ourselves a little plug, though, in terms of what we have accomplished this last year. We are educators, right? So we brought in a lot of educators, because I think that, like Dr. King said, and I know I'm going to mess up this quote, but the truth crushed to earth will, eventually rise up. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And Brian, if you're throwing out names of mentors, I want to throw out my mentor, who, and you might have heard of her, Edna Bonacic, is a leading scholar on racism, and she's a Marxist. So just full disclosure, she is a Marxist, but Edna grew up in South Africa, and she made me see that what was going on in my neighborhood in South Central LA, it was very comparable to what was going on during her childhood in South Africa. Her father was a rabbi who was assigned to South Africa. And then along comes Palestine, and it made it so clear what is going on. These systems are all connected, and they're connected with power. And when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we have, I hope, shown that African Americans, and that's why I love Ahlam's, her poster of George Floyd and a young Palestinian woman who was arrested. But we're the canaries in the coal mine, because if it can happen to us in South Central LA or in Chicago or Detroit, then eventually it's going to happen in nicer neighborhoods to wealthier people, because the police can do that. And I think that's why it is so important for us to concentrate on getting these folks under control, because what I see now is that police are out of control, taking out badges, beating people, just taking people and not even having a record of arresting them. And I hope that we have exposed all of that, and to show, because LAPD is complaining, speaking of the good news stand, LAPD is complaining now that, homicides have gone up in the city, so you need more cops. When, we sort of, we react in a sort of Pavlovian way and saying, oh yeah, we need more cops, when we know that police don't stop homicides. Police really don't stop crime. And it makes us feel good to know that Los Angeles has 8,000 to 10,000 police officers, but they really stop crime. They react to crime, but they really don't stop crime. So I just said all that to say, I think that, patting ourselves on the back, that we have done a great job this past year. Stay tuned next year or in the fall for some very interesting program. We're starting to line things up now. And you all were just fantastic in terms of underscoring what we have done all year. And it's not just been me, Robbie, and Jeremy, but, you know, so many others, and Stan, of course, so many others who have contributed their time. You know, I know you guys are getting paid the big bucks, Brian, but, you know, we thank you anyway. And that's just a joke, because, you know, we're not paying people big bucks, but we really do appreciate the passion that you brought to this program today.
Well, hold on, because there's more credit where credit's due. Hold on. I've been paying a lot of attention on what you all have been doing, and it very much mirrored something that kind of had its genesis at Cal State. We got a State of Hate hearing, an actual legislative hearing to be held on campus. And you know who were the stars of it? Of course you do, the students. And they were featured in the New York Times. And I said, look, this is the kind of brain power and discourse. Look, wait, not just here. Look at CSU, San Francisco State, Stop AAPI Hate. Look at LA, Black Lives Matter LA. Look at San Jose, the Institute for Human Rights. We're doing stuff in the CSU, folks. And by the way, every dime that I got from that, what do you call it? That Wang Award, I donated back to either the university and to different folks here, and also to charitable institutions like Matthew Shepard Foundation, Muslim Jewish Advisory Council. You get the idea. But what I'm saying to you, what you created here didn't just like go out into the ether. I went to people before the legislature and I said, if you want to know what we're looking to do by having a State of Hate Commission, go look at what our campus is doing with something that has nothing to do with our center. This is just the way we roll. And somebody said to me, have you been invited for the, I said, don't worry, I'll hear from them, because that's what happened. Because when you talk about the beloved community, like the Reverend Vivian spoke about, and yeah, we had people who I diverged with ideologically on things. But however, whether it's you, Mary, here at Cal State, who for, am I allowed to say this, who for decades has been an indefatigable, and not without controversy, but in a good trouble way, in the way that we love Cal State and love you. This is a template for something that we're trying to do, not only within the state, just hear me out, academics, community stakeholders, advocacy groups, NGOs, and not a concentration, human relations commissions too, not a concentration on law enforcement, but a concentration on this kind of grouping that has been so maligned over the last 4 years. Community folks, people who were trying to expand suffrage, we're all on the same team. Mary Texeira, and by the way, and I didn't know how to, like, I want to give one award at a time, but to the group that put this together, we have always promoted it. Our center will always link to it on our page when I figure out how to do such technological feats. But nevertheless, Mary, thank you for what you've done. And to the whole crew that put together this excellent series where you got so many great and diverse scholars and journalists together to talk about the tough issues and to hold folks to account. Because part of the framework, and what I'm saying is I gave this to legislators, is that if you put together subject matter experts, you don't have to be an expert with a PhD or a JD or something, you can be an expert by living it. We want a place where that is recorded and welcome, not where we have to beg legislators who sometimes are turned out to give us the time. And what you did, Mary, and the whole group here, and happy birthday, Dean Cesar, is to put together a template that was exactly the kind of stuff that we had in mind, including other things like commissions. My mentor was part of the Kerner Commission. And what this does is it gives an anchor for voices that wouldn't be heard in a kind of contextual way. It is a well-deserved Superlative Scholar Award, Mary. Thank you for blessing our center and our campus for longer than I'm allowed to state.
Not at all, not at all. And I do want to add my voice to thanking Dean Caballero. Because without him, we could not have had the resources. We would not have had Robbie, who is definitely a huge part of this. And you know, sometimes I would say, well, maybe we're going a little too far. Maybe the dean won't let us continue. But we just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. I'm telling you, never, never, never a questioning or crossword coming from Dean Caballero. So I want to really publicly thank you for your putting up with us, shall we say, and for your beautiful comments today. I appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Thank you, Mary.
And for Professor, you're welcome. Professor Streeter, we hope to see you have a great career. We know that you're just starting out your career, and it is very, very unusual to see a new professor who has created this voice in the community. So we just want to encourage you to continue. You're going to get a lot of pushback. And if you would like to talk about that pushback, I'll give you my telephone number because I've been taking notes for the last 30 years. But, you know, we do want to encourage you because all of us on this screen right now, whether you see our faces or not, are doing good work. We're making, like John Lewis said, we're making good trouble. And we want to continue to make that good trouble, even though, you know, we are not welcome in some, you know, some areas, even on our own campuses. You know, we continue to do it because we know that there's a bigger prize out there than our own careers. There's the prize of making people free, if that's not too lofty a goal. You know, is to, you know, people will ask us occasionally, what do you want, you know, what do you want to accomplish? And I haven't been the only one to say this, but, you know, we want white policing. The Palestinians want policing that is going to be fair to everybody. We want police to stop killing Black people. We want police to stop killing Black people. That's the bottom line, and to treat us the same way you treat white people in their communities. So
each week we would say, oh, this is week 4, oh, this is week 5, but this is week 7. And here we are a year later, and we're so proud to be here and have you special guests join us each and every week. It's just wonderful.
Yeah. And the one who never shows his face, Jeremy Murray, Shea will tell you, and Brian will tell you that he's persistent, and he's the power behind the throne, more or less. He would be the last to agree with that, but Jeremy is our anchor. Jeremy does all of the work that we don't want to do. So we do appreciate. I see your comment, Jeremy. If you could just show your face, that would be really cool. We want to see your new ponytail. your COVID ponytail. But yeah, want to say a couple of words, Jeremy?
A great thanks to our guests and to Cesar for letting us do everything that we do. But congratulations to Mary on the great award from Brian Center. That's really exciting news.
Thank you.
And thanks Ahlam for also making these connections. It's an honor. It's an education to sit in on these conversations.
Can I just close with something positive real briefly? And that is what you are doing is making a difference. Just like a lot of snowflakes create elevation, what we now have is a connection to people in DC. So when I go out to Kansas City and somebody says, we have a problem with police violence or allegations thereof, there are people in Washington I can actually email, you know, so that's something. When we have people in a coordinated civil rights consortium that are pushing, I'm telling you, that are pushing for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And we've got about a consortium of 40 groups here in the state that are pushing to improve police practices and get something where there's going to be accountability. I wish I could guarantee things, but we're getting a hearing and there's a momentum that's going on. But here's the thing. The overall support that we had 1 year ago has declined, obviously not among the African-American community and allies. but on that flexible middle. And that's what we have to make sure that we can keep together as a policy implementation effort, because that's what we're working on now. And the civil rights community is engaged and they're coalesced. The issue is politically and otherwise, can it be pushed over the obstacles that so many folks have written about, including, by the way, my law school classmate, Michelle Alexander.
You're just dropping all kinds of names.
We love her. We love
on?
her.
I'm happy that we are ending with that positive quote, and I'm reading. I just finished reading this tome on Frederick Douglass's life, and I think I don't have to explain to anyone who Frederick Douglass is, but on his deathbed, young man asked him, what advice would you give? And I think we have all followed that advice, even though we don't realize it. And he said 3 words. He said, agitate, agitate, agitate. And I think that's what Ahlam is doing. That's what we're all doing. We are shaking things up. And I've lived a long time, many decades, and I've never seen people get on board with police, with the topic of policing. Never seen this before, and thank goodness, we, and I hope you don't misunderstand, but to see that image of George Floyd, and someone said he made a sacrifice. Sacrifice usually implies that you volunteer to do this, right? George Floyd didn't volunteer to give his life. But thank goodness we saw the life go out of him. And I think that's why, everyone is finally seeing this, to its, for what it is, for what it is. Ahlam, did you want to say something?
Yes, I just want to thank you all again, not only for allowing me this important space and to share this statement with you, but also for all the work you have done throughout the year. And you hosted me before with Professor Robin Kelly, if you remember, from UCLA, when we talked about
you were one of our first. You were one of our first.
The intersection of marginality and also the intersection of oppression, systems of oppression, whether in the United States and Israel and other places. So thank you for allowing me this chance. And I would like to call for the administration to react to the racist email that was sent to campus yesterday, and not to let it go through a conversation, panel open to everyone else. They have to have a strong statement against any form of racism and racist discourse, whether it's aimed at Arabs, Blacks, Jews, you name it. It should not be allowed at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Ahlam, keep blowing your trumpet. Thank you.
Lots of thanks on the Q&A to Dr. Mutaseb also. So we're happy to have you. Happy to have all of you. And we're not gonna. I may be wrong, Stan, but do we want to take up any more of these good folks' time?
No, we are done, and I thank them for being here, and look forward to seeing all of you in the future.
Yeah, and thanks again. Thanks, Brian and Shea and everyone who has so wonderfully given of their time and their knowledge. Have a great summer, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you all.